Let's go.
Welcome to the SOULFAM Podcast, where we expand your personal universe. I'm Diana Marquetta, and in each episode, SOULFAM co-founder, co-creator Lexi Strummer-Solden and I interview the world's most rising and longtime experts in consciousness, spirituality, entertainment, healing, and science. From Earth's dimensions and dimensions way, way beyond. On the SOULFAM Podcast, our frequencies are high and your heart chakras will open as these powerful voices of today share cutting-edge research, profound experiences, and valuable knowledge for your world in this out-of-this-world, thought-provoking, envelope-pushing interviews that could only take place right here on the SOULFAM Podcast. Now, a word for our sponsors, CBD Pure and Oweli Supplements. Both companies have gratefully offered a 15% discount with the SOULFAM Podcast, coupon code SOULFAM, and free shipping. Lexi and I have been working with these companies the last couple of weeks, trying a couple of products, and we both have had some great experiences.
Do you want to talk about the CBD Pure, your experience with that?
They have a CBD Pure muscle and joint lotion, which is made with non-GMO hemp grown without herbicides or pesticides or other dangerous chemicals. I had a couple of bumps and bruises from an accident and some ongoing neck pain from another accident. And I have to say that I walk around now with that lotion and it helps reduce those bumps and bruises and reduces the inflammation and just overall gives me some temporary relief from some ongoing pain.
That's pretty impressive there with working out and things like that is so good for you.
Yeah, super helpful. And didn't you treat your neighborhood cat?
I did. Yes. I asked for the CBD pet hemp oil from CBD Pure. So Frank is our neighborhood cat. He is not neutered. And I have a kitten who is not spayed. So unfortunately, Frank cannot come in. But we still feed Frank. We're building him an outdoor shelter. He's a wonderful cat, but he looks like he's got some arthritis. But I can tell after some of those nights being out in this rainy weather, he's not feeling as springy. So I did give him some of the CBD hemp oil. It's just half a little dropper and I put it on a plate. He took the hemp oil and then he laid down in his little makeshift blanket nap area and took a nap. So
that's so sweet.
Yeah. So
Frank,
I know.
What a great cat.
I know. Frank is a great cat. So yeah, thank you CBD Pure for your CBD pet hemp oil helping poor arthritic Frank take a nap. He really needed the rest.
And then the other thing that we both have been trying is the Oweli supplements.
Yes.
Ladies, I have UTIs off and on.
Yeah.
They have a UTD product for UTI symptoms. Usually I buy several different kinds of supplements for that. And this has everything in one pill. I just feel much more at comfort. So my comfort level seems to have improved from that. Hope that makes sense. It's a little too much
information. It totally makes sense. Is that supplement like preventative?
Kind of feels preventative. It feels like it's helping certain aspects of like my system be elevated and it helps fight bacteria. Yeah. And
nice.
did you try something yourself?
I tried the Oweli Neuro Brain and Focus formula supplement, supposed to help with healthy brain function, focus and alertness. It's supposed to enhance memory retention. I don't know if anyone knows this, but I have ADHD. I have massive amounts of ADHD. I'm sure if you've met me, you'd be like, no, really? That's crazy. I can't imagine that. I take medication for it. What I like about the Neuro Brain and Focus formula is that it's got a ton of B vitamins. And it's super interesting because whether or not I'm taking my prescription ADHD medication or not, my ADHD doctor always reminds me that I need to take B vitamins in the morning. Reason being if you have ADHD, if you've got an ADHD brain, chances are you are a little bit low on B vitamins anyway. So yeah, it was
Didn't know
interesting.
that.
So, I mean, yeah. So trying to start the day and focus from a super depleted, vitamin deficient sort of place is really tough. So his whole point to me was B vitamins every day, whether or not you're taking ADHD medication, make sure you exercise, eat well, meditate, all of that, but B vitamins every morning.
Wow.
So first thing in the morning with breakfast, I think it's a really, really, really effective addition to my ADHD sort of plan in the morning. And I've been feeling, I guess, less malnourished. That's probably not even the right term. I've been feeling more, I have more vitamins that my body is supposed to have.
So once again, we thank our sponsors, CBD Pure and Oweli Supplements. We'll post links to both product lines on our Instagrams and on our upcoming website. Just remember your code for 15% off and free shipping is SOULFAM. That's SOULFAM, SOULFAM. Now, on with the show.
Welcome to the SOULFAM podcast. We are beyond honored to welcome Dr. David Morehouse here today. Dr. Morehouse is the author of Remote Viewing and Psychic Warrior. He is a decorated military veteran as well. Thank you for being here, David.
Hi, ladies. Hey, pardon me. First of all, just let me say to you that it's really an honor to be here. I appreciate it. I'm grateful and humbled, and that you find anything in my life and my deeds, worthy to be of interest. So I just thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
No, I think we're going to fangirl here. So I think we're the ones who are honored, and the work you've done is really fascinating. And if you could share just a little bit of your background, both from a military perspective and what you've sort of done since the military, or how you digressed from the military, I think our listeners would be super curious to learn about remote viewing and the protocols for it.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I was a third generation, Army officer. My grandfather served as a colonel in World War I. My father served as a warrant officer in World War II and Korea. Both of them were career men. I was in it for a career. I have a son who is a career command sergeant's major, highest rank you can attain as a non-commissioned officer, and I have a grandson who just entered service as an Army aviation mechanic. So it's kind of in our DNA to do this, to serve the citizens of the Republic, and we take it as really a reverent responsibility to do that, and all of us have loved it, and would not do anything to trade the experiences that we had there. I commanded the Army's only separate airborne rifle company, which was an unusual thing to be given that command. I did that as a young lieutenant. I barely outranked the guys that I was in command of. And then I also commanded a Ranger company. I commanded these for pretty lengthy periods of time, longer than usual, like upwards of 2 years. And then when I left the Rangers, I needed to do a job, another kind of a job, and I had been selected to be an aide to an Italian general in Vicenza, Italy. So I was heading to Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, to learn to speak Italian, and then go be this Italian general's aide. And the day I changed command, Colonel Keith Nightingale, my battalion commander in the Rangers, came over, put his hand on my shoulder, and he goes, "Oh, bad news, you're a free agent now," because he picked some kid in country that already speaks the language, so you're out of a job. Well, that's not a good thing to be, because if you have had all of these command positions and you're, you've been an aide to 2 generals already, you've commanded 2 companies, you're scuba qualified, Pathfinder qualified, you're Ranger regimentally affiliated, you're a master parachutist, jump master qualified, all these different things. You become a prime catch for any assignment officer looking to stuff you in one of the 3 R's, which is recruiting command, of which I'd opened a vein if they had sent me there, or to ROTC or reserve component duty. So none of those were of interest to me because I was always trying to seek the hardest, most difficult, most dangerous kinds of jobs. And I did not want to go to some college campus for the next, 4 or 5 years or some other place like that. So I called in some favors within the Ranger Regiment, and some guys called, and I ended up entered the special access world. And, I went to the first circle of hell, which was, the Department of the Army Special Access roster. And I served as the deputy executive officer, briefing John O. Marsh Jr., the Secretary of the Army at the time, in the Pentagon almost 2-3 times a week, 4 times a week sometimes. And I was in the Secret Army of Northern Virginia. It's also called the Activity. It's also called ISA. At that time, it was codenamed Royal Cape. And it's a very unusual unit. And if you wanted to read more about it, there's a book called Killer Elite. And that tells the whole story of the unit that I was involved in there. I left there and was recruited into Sunstreak, which was another special access program. This one was still DASR, Department of the Army Special Access roster, which that essentially means that when you, as a serving special operations infantry officer, you go into a DASR assignment, the DASR people go up to the infantry branch floor and they say, give us the file folder, personnel folder from Morehouse. And they take it and they go down to the DASR room, and your file is now kept in a safe and managed by DASR people. And your name and all references to you are stricken from the military personnel computer system. So if anybody were to type in my name and look for me somewhere, it shows up service member not on file. So that's your first level of just disappearing into a special access program.
Is that for your protection, by the way?
I'm sorry?
Is that for your protection?
Well, it's not for my protection or the people serving in its protection. It's to protect the secrets contained within that organization. It's for that purpose. They don't want anybody connecting names and faces with places and units and code names and things like that. But this second special access program I went into was a CIA oversight provided to a program that went to the Army in circa 1978-79. And it was a program where they were training remote viewers, and it was now housed under the Defense Intelligence Agency's Directorate of Technology and Science, with oversight being provided by Dr. Jack Verona, who was the chief scientist of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And it's an unusual circumstance of how I got there. I was the only combat arms officer that was ever brought into that organization. There were no other Rangers ever there. And I was the first special operations combat officer that ever was brought there. All the rest of them were intel people, meaning they were intelligence officers, male or female, Department of the Army or Department of Defense intel personnel that were civilians. So coming there was quite an unusual thing. And I was brought there because when I was back at the other place, Royal Cape, the Activity, you go through a polygraph every 6 months to every quarter, depending on, what's going on. And when you go through the polygraph, it's not a full lifestyle polygraph. It's a CI polygraph, which is counterintelligence. They want to make sure you're not giving secrets away to anybody. And so they take you through the polygraph, and after you pass the polygraph, you're required to go sit down with the command psychologist, who is a PhD detailed to keep his finger on the psychiatric pulse of the organization. Why? Because organizations that deal in that kind of work have extraordinarily high divorce rates. They have high degrees of alcoholism. They have people that cope with it and cope with it well. They have other people who don't cope with it well. Kind of the restrictions and the rules. You're wearing civilian clothes. It's easy to lose track of the fact you're still in the military, and bizarre things begin to unfold. And this psychologist would sit you down, and he already had a big profile on you, because part of being accepted into the unit is to go through all of these, the Myers-Briggs and all the other psychological testing, because they want to make sure that you're a relatively sound mind and body when you get there. Not saying I was, but there were certain things that happened to me when I was a ranger in the desert of Jordan that I had not shared with anybody other than the Ranger Battalion commander and the doctor and stuff like that in the Ranger Battalion. And of course, all my rangers knew what happened. And that was simply that I was hit in the head by a machine gun bullet fired by a Jordanian machine gunner in a training exercise where he attempted to kill American Rangers. We were training Jordanian Rangers, and in this exercise, I was with the assault element, and I was evaluating the assault element, and 2 Jordanian machine guns were attached to the machine gun element that was, in this exercise, and they swept on over and raked about 100 rounds of fire. It's called grazing fire. I'm sure your listeners are really turned on by all of this.
I am. I'm super fascinated. This is a whole world.
Yeah, I mean, I had 2 grandfathers in the Army in World War II. We're good.
Okay, good. So it was a blessing that none of my Rangers were hit. I mean, there were canteen caps shot off. There were holes in their blouses and in their load carrying equipment, but nobody got hit except me. And why I got chosen for this, I don't know, but I do. I did get chosen, and I was hit by a machine gun bullet that travels roughly 2,832 feet per second. I could be off by a few feet per second there, but it's fast and you don't see it coming. And it was not a ricochet, so it hit me directly in the helmet. And when it hit me directly in the helmet, it just literally took me off my feet, because the Kevlar caught it. It didn't skip off the helmet. The Kevlar caught the thing. So all that kinetic energy, which I don't remember what that translates to, but it's like being hit by a baseball bat. I think in the number foot-pounds of pressure that you get and the velocity of that thing, it's significant. And it knocked me out. And during the time that I was knocked out, I had this, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. And one minute I was looking at something in the physical world, which was the back of the platoon leader's hand, because I was watching him key the mic to give the op skids to, shift fire. And as I was watching it, just the back of his hand, for some reason, that was my focal point. Next thing that happened, I was standing in similar terrain, but I was standing in front of something that was talking to me. And we all, in that time, there's a process in your biological brain that it's called analytical overlay. It's the process of imagination. Your brain is taking this conceptual illusion and it is spinning it at the speed of human thought, which is faster than the cosmological constant of the speed of light. Or so says Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher and Russell Targ and other physicists who have studied that. It is at a significant speed where your brain, uncomfortable with what it is detecting and decoding in a waveform expression of something, it decodes it based on familiar references. So, I mean, I didn't understand that in the moment, but I understood it in years gone past. That it's why the thing looked like Yoda, or Obi-Wan. Why? Because that was the time Star Wars was out and stuff. And of course, everybody had seen that. So your brain turns around and goes, oh, I know what this is. And it turns it into Obi-Wan. But what was poignant about the exchange there is that I was given a message by this standing in front of me. And the message was that you've chosen the wrong profession. You've chosen the wrong path in life, rather. You're not on purpose, and you're supposed to be pursuing a path of peace, which that does not translate to a ranger who has spent, up to that point in time, 12 years studying the art and science of taking human life. And now all of a sudden this thing is happening and it's saying that to you. And in my analysis and study in years gone by, I could tell you that I do not, I called it an angel in Psychic Warrior. I could have called it anything, an entity, a phantom, whatever. But what I really believe it was is myself talking to me. And I had this moment of being knocked unconscious, and I had a reflection of me talking to me and saying, "You're not on purpose," which was confusing to me, even when I had this epiphany that that's what I was doing or what was happening to me. Why? Well, because I was extraordinarily good at what I did in the Army, being the honor graduate of every school I ever went to. And that's a significant thing. I was the number one cadet commissioned into the regular Army in my year group out of like 25 or 2,600 cadets rather. I was a distinguished military graduate, and the George Collette Marshall Award winner, the Ralph D. Marchand Award winner. And I just defined for myself that when you do something that well, you're on purpose. And what I have learned, since is that assigning yourself that purpose because you do something well is not necessarily your purpose. Your purpose could be something entirely different. So how you find that is something we can talk about later. But I came to this understanding, and that's where the first kind of chip out of the foundation that I was standing on of my beliefs began to crumble because I didn't know how to process that. My father had a similar experience in Korea where he was knocked unconscious and had a visitation, and at which he didn't talk to me about until the day I resigned from the Army. And my mother forced him to tell me this story. And he was knocked unconscious by a North Korean mortar shell that blew up near a tank that he was trying to rescue the tank with the tank crew. He was their motor officer and trying to get a track put back on it so it could get out of a depression and back up while firing, at the positions that were firing on it. And they finally got bracketed, and a mortar round landed in the depression on the other side of the tank, not near my father, but the blast wave knocked him out. And he had a helmet on, but they didn't wear chin straps in those days. So the blast wave tore the helmet off, and then his head smacks the tank, which is frozen, and it knocked him unconscious. But he came too quickly, but not without having this example, this vision, where it was something about having a son that would one day do something special, whatever that was. And he, of course, in that day and age, men did not talk about things like that. You didn't share those kinds of things, particularly coming out of the war. But I will tell you, he and my mother had tried to have children. My sister's 10 years older than me. So for 10 years, they had no success, not for lack of trying, based on everything I've ever heard. So they were not able to conceive. But no kidding, like the week he gets back from Korea, sperm meets egg, and there it is, right? And so I'm on my way, 9 months later. So he just had to deal with that all those years, like the fact that he had a son. I'm not going to have a son. And then he has a son. So he didn't know what to do with it. He shared it with my mom, and then he shared it with me, which brought tears to everyone because it was so synchrodestiny, right, of having those things happen. But back to this psychologist, I'm sitting there with him, and I passed my polygraph, and he's going through these questions. And so at the last question he always asks you is, he just kind of looks at you and says, "Okay, is there anything, are you sure there's nothing else you'd like to talk to me about?" and which I always thought was creepy because it was always said to you in such a way to make you think like maybe he knew something and you were supposed to come clean on it. And I went, this was my second time that I was there. So I've been in the unit now a little over 6 months, I guess. And I said, actually, yeah, I had this thing happen to me in the desert in Jordan. And my shot in the helmet, knocked out, had this vision. And I said, and then that hasn't happened, but on at least 3 occasions, I felt like I separated from my physical body for very brief moments, but it was vivid, and and I was very much aware of what was happening, and I would get to a certain point and then snap back again. Now I didn't know what he was going to do. I'll be honest with you, and I kind of imagined that he might pick up the phone and send me to some place like maybe Walter Reed to get me a handful of psychotropic medications and numb me and leave me that way for a while. But instead, he picks up these, goes to a safe in his office, a file safe, and he opens it up and he pulls out these blue folders. And the folders are stamped secret grill flame, which happens to be the code word for the remote viewing program. And these are remote viewing session reports. And so he hands these to me and doesn't tell me that. He just hands them to me and says, I would really like, look at these and give me your assessment in the morning, we'll talk. So I just go brew a big pot of coffee and I hang out in my office all night long because I'm in a SCIF, a secret compartmented information facility, so I can read these things. And I do, and I'm fascinated. There's language in them that just causes me to, my curiosity to peak, because you're sitting in a secret compartmented information facility. You're in a highly classified special access program. You feel at this point you've kind of seen everything. And if you're in that environment, you kind of trust and believe everything that's around you. And I'm reading 2 different people referred to by numbers, not names. And it is clear to me that one person, they're both physically co-located, but one person is directing the other person, telling them to look here, look at that, turn this way, turn that way, count these things, let me know when you think you're there. And the other person is describing something that quite obviously in the language is not in their physical location. And one of the things that I always like to reference is because it was a thing that kind of sent me over the top with it, which was this one person who is called the monitor. I knew that, I found that out later. The monitor says to the other person, the viewer, again, both referred to as numbers, says, are you outside the building that you're supposed to be outside of? The viewer responds, yes, I believe I'm outside now. And okay, are you by the door where you're supposed to be? Yes, I'm by the door, I think. Yeah, I'm by the door. The monitor says, okay, now pass through the wall and turn your attention to the contents of the room and describe them. I had to read that phrase several times. Pass through the wall. Pass through the wall, not open the door or knock or ring the doorbell or anything else. And what I found out later is these were the remote viewers who were doing the remote viewing in support of the rescue attempt of the Iranian hostages, the embassy personnel that were in the embassy in Tehran being held by the Republican Guard, or rather the student guard that was there. And I didn't understand, how that was actionable intelligence or anything, or even I was just at that point intrigued by the fact that we were doing something like that, and it just sounded crazy, but at the same time, like maybe I would get some answers about some of the things that were happening if I were to, explore that further. So I saw the doctor the next morning. He handed me more folders and, more folders. And what he was doing over the next several months was doing what is called in the Intel business, a limited read on. So limited read on means he's just testing your responses to things. He's never going to disclose what it is because they don't do that. If you do that and put all your cards on the table, then you now have given somebody who does not, quote, have a need to know that information, they now have that information. And oftentimes, you could pitch somebody like that, and the officer has the ability to turn around and go, no, no way am I going to do that kind of thing. And now it's a trouble, it's a problem. And then you have to, make sure that they go through a read off and make sure that they, swear they'll never tell what they were, exposed to, etc. So they're always very cautious in that way. Smart ones are anyway.
Just to interject one moment, David, I have a question. Yeah. You're reading this and you're thinking, this is crazy, but there's a part of you that's resonating with it, correct? And a part of you that felt like this is true. Am I understanding that?
Probably crazy is not a good word to describe it. Uh-huh. I didn't find it was, I didn't look at it and go, this is just crap. I didn't do that. I was looking at it and going, because remember, I'm a decorated Army officer who's done everything that I've done in the service. And now I'm in a intel unit, highly classified, and I've already been there for a while, and I've seen a lot of things. In being there, the activity was an unusual group of folks. And so I just learned that if somebody told me that they were sticking antennas in dogs' tails and sending them into the Soviet Union across the border, I'd be going, really? Because I would have believed it. And the truth is, they would have. If they thought they could have increased the range or, gotten the dog across the border and actually sent it to go sit down next to somebody and, and listen for them. All that stuff would have been real. These are there was no end to spycraft and intel collection capabilities. It's all because nothing is 100% accurate. In that business, nothing is 100% accurate. If there was one that was 100% accurate, that's what they'd use. But none of it, from satellite imagery to aerial photography to HUMINT to SIGINT to ELINT to, any other of the other INTs that are out there. Right now, there's something like 39 of them, 39 different hard, fast intel collection methodologies. So clearly, none of them are 100% accurate, or they wouldn't have 39 of them. They're collecting pieces of the intelligence puzzle using everything. It's called all-source intelligence. So some customer comes in and says, hey, we need to know everything you can know about X. Well, all-source intelligence methods require they use everything that they can get their hands on to do that. And then the analysts piece all those pieces of the puzzle together to create the picture and hopefully develop actionable intelligence for some reason, whatever that might be. So I was interested in this and I believed it. And I guess I just saw it as outside the realm of the normal kinds of things I expected to be reading. But I certainly believed it. I just didn't know what it was. And I didn't know really what it was attached to. Although, I saw Farsi writing. I saw Persian references. And I saw things like that let me know that they were looking at something in a foreign country. And of course, this had already gone down, right? This event took place in 78, 79. And now I'm deep into the mid 80s when this is happening. So I am looking at this going, wow, this is really unusual. And I just kept getting this limited read on until one day he just goes, come on, we're going to take a trip. So the psychologist and I get in a car. he doesn't say anything to anybody. I told my boss that I was going with him, to go see somebody, which they went, okay. And I went off to Fort Meade, Maryland. And we drive up to this building that is just a ramshackle, like a shack. I mean, it looked horrible. The paint was peeling off the sides. The shingles up top were these army green shingles, and they were all cut, like bologna on a frying pan kind of thing. So, I mean, clearly this was an old building. As it turned out, it was a World War II baker's school, now converted into the offices of the remote viewing unit. And there's this big, huge steel door, which I just remember thinking, I mean, you could karate chop your way through the side of the building, but there's a big steel door with a push combination lock on it. And he knocks on the door, and the secretary answers, and I step inside with him. And my first visual was looking across what they called the lobby. And anybody that's ever been in any kind of a government building or on a military installation, if you go to an Air Force military office somewhere, there are pictures of Air Force stuff, planes and missiles and whatever else. There's pictures of that up on the walls. And anything else you go that's that, whatever they do, that's what's there. And what I see across the lobby, the entire wall is painted with a galaxy on it. It's a mural of a galaxy with red gaseous clouds and, stars and all, and planets. And I just thought, that is not something you see in a military unit ever. Right. And then the doctor peels off to go be with the program manager, a guy by the name of GS-15, by the name of Fern Gavin. And so I then am, taken around and I meet Lynn, I meet Paul, I meet Ed Dames, I meet Gabrielle Pettengale, who ended up being my trainer. I meet Angela, I meet Robin, and I meet Mel. And Mel Riley is, in the smokers part, which is the back room. Mel, Angela, and Robin all smoked. And in those days, you could still smoke in buildings and things. And anyway, I meet everybody. And nobody looks right to me. Nobody looks like I would have expected them to look. Mel Riley is sitting there with a giant piece of deer skin in front of him, and he is sewing beads onto this deer skin in this intricate pattern, which is just unbelievable. And then Angela and Robin both have black cloths draped over these gray metal army desks. And they are practicing with tarot cards. And I thought, holy crap, what have I gotten myself into? This is really strange. And then, Lynn Buchanan's walking around in stocking feet and sitting on one of those crazy computer chairs where you kneel on it, right? And it was just, the whole thing was off. It was just off for me. And
it's a great scene.
Then taken in to meet Fern.
It's fantastic. Was the psychic was it Ingo Swan? Was that
Ingo Swan?
Were they there at that point?
Oh no, Ingo Swan was never there.
Never. Oh, okay.
No.
Understood.
No, he was
understood.
This program, its birthplace was at SRI International. And this happened back. People have to understand what was going on in the 70s, right? It was a huge point of transformation for intelligence, for the nation, for the military serving the nation. We came out of, we basically ran out of Vietnam as fast as we could, right? Leaving everything there, pushing stuff off ships, and we just pulled out of there as fast as we could. And you could call it, I guess, peace with honor, or you could just call it we hauled ass to get out of there. So it was really a miserable thing after only 10 years of war. Just understand the impact that had on the Army. There was so much drug abuse in the Army at that time. And they didn't even know what they were going to do but they knew that they no longer had a selective service system. So now it was all volunteer Army. They called it the VOLAR. It was the point at which everything was changing. So the CIA found out in circa 71, 72 that the Chinese and the Soviet Union in particular were scarfing up young boys or girls that had been, purported to have psychic abilities. They were clairvoyants, is what they were described as. And then they were pulling them in to train them and, nurture them and test them, and then certainly to use them as part of some sort of an intelligence collection methodology. Well, when the CIA gets a piece of information like that, whether it's true or not doesn't really matter. The issue is, they're going to try to see if they can replicate it or if there's anything to it. So do they need to be afraid of it, or do they need to build a counter for it? What do they need to do? And you had Robert Gottlieb, who was the scientist of MK Ultra fame. And again, you're looking at the CIA, and they pitched this off to him, and they said, do we have anything like that? And of course, the answer was no. Well, then we need it, or we need to find out if it's a viable program. So let's get busy. So they put out, I'm sure, a request for proposals and identify what they want. And appears that Stanford Research Institute International, which used to be part of Stanford, but at this point was not. And they took 2 laser physicists and another team of scientists, mathematicians, and other things, and put them together to start working on the deliverables of this sole source contract. A sole source contract is difficult to get, but it was a lot of money for them. And they were basically, I'll state it in lay terms of all the deliverables, of which there were many. I'm just going to say the top 3 based on, my review. The first one was essentially to say, prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, using scientific methodology, that human beings have an ability to see something distant in space-time. Prove it and tell us, is it real, or is it just a bunch of gobbledygook? And that one, I understand, was pretty much answered in about 18 months, where they came back and said, the ability exists, absolutely, irrefutably, undeniably. Our experiments proved it, and proved it again and proved it again. We replicated the experiments and proved it. And the CIA, being the CIA, which is notorious for keeping somebody between them and the problem or potential problem, realized that somewhere down the line, somebody, if this was found out, would say, and did you double check their science and their experiments, right? Some critic would say, they cheated or did something else. So they brought in 2 other auditing agencies, laboratories, to audit their work and their scientific methodology. And they were given a clean bill of health with just some minor, fixes on some things. And so it marched on. The next one, theoretically, would have been, tell us who will be good at this so we can figure out where to find them in the population, harvest them, train them, and prepare them to be actionable, intel folks utilizing these things that you have. And then, of course, the third major deliverable, as I saw it, was tell us you can replicate this. And what that means is not replicate the experiment. It means tell us you can develop a training program to train these people. That's big. We got to be able to do that. So the second question was the most poignant and kind of became my mantra of what I was trying to do with remote viewing in teaching it, et cetera. And that was, they said that it's not unique to anybody. It is absolutely not unique to anybody. You're born with the abilities. Everybody's born with the abilities. Nobody, gets a fuller cup than anybody else in terms of the abilities. I mean, you're born with it. So it's the legions of the status quo, it's parents, it's peers at work, or it's all of that defines for us what we are capable of, that they tell us. These things are not allowed, right? That you can't talk like that. You can't say those kinds of things, that you have a vision, or you have knowledge, or that you hear something, from the non-physical or anything else, that is beaten out of you, shamed out of you, right? All these things. In most cases, it is not allowed within, normal social circles or religious circles. It just isn't, because you're saying then that you have an ability that has been assigned to a belief in something that you'll never actually realize until you die, right? So it's God or something else, right? You can't say that you are omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, that you can commune with the non-physical, that you can learn from it, contribute to it, interact with it. You can't say that. It's not allowed. So it's one of the reasons why in the global society, that ability has been just tamped down, and you forget it, and you stop listening to it. You stop trying to open, conduits of consciousness that allow you to learn it or to hear it or to capitalize on it. It happens to you nonetheless. I mean, it is always there, these minor perturbations up through the unconscious, right? Into consciousness, where you become aware of something, and you don't know why you're aware of it, but you are, and suddenly, what you were aware of, what you saw, what you felt or heard in that moment is absolutely correct, right? Or you have a minor perturbation, a thought about somebody that you haven't maybe talked to in a long time, and then they call. Or you are singing a song as you're driving down the road, and you turn the radio on, and lo and behold, it's the same song, and it's right at the same place where you were singing it. Now, of course, skeptics will turn around and call these things coincidences, but I assure you they are not. There is, we can choose not to listen. We can choose not to reopen these gifts that were given to us. But the most important thing that came out of the CIA's research, in my opinion, is this, that it is not unique to anyone. You don't have to be shot in the helmet. You don't have to have a heart attack. You don't have to have a near-death experience. You don't have to have a spiritual trauma, physical trauma, emotional trauma. You don't have to have any of those things. It's there. All you have to do is make the choice that you're going to open that, which was put into you for a reason. That's the thing I've always tried to instill in my students, that you were given this for a reason. If we had developed this and not surrendered that to something else that we're supposed to accept on a basis of faith, if we had understood our own power and abilities, and we had nurtured that and raised generation after generation in the global society to think that way and feel that way and interact that way, how different might the global society now be? I submit probably significantly different. And is there a way in which to rekindle that? Absolutely. Is it going to happen in my lifetime? Absolutely not. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. My job is, on this planet, is to be a teacher, an educator, a trainer of this, someone who talks about it and presents it factually and scientifically, truthfully about what it is. And if young mothers, who are really the powerhouses on this planet, right? It's the one thing that even American and foreign politicians are most afraid of is mothers, because
they should be.
You are in a bad way if they are against what you're doing. If mothers start doing this and encouraging and building it and nurturing it in children, and those children then grow up understanding that it's purposefully there, and how significant a gift it is, and they raise their children with that same ideology, right? And the next generation, mathematically speaking, 3 generations, given the current population and factoring in growth and death, that puts us in a number within the global society where we reach what's called a critical mass. And when you reach a critical mass of of a singularity. In other words, a way of thinking and knowing about who you are and what you are, about these gifts. It can transform, it'll start a tidal wave of shift and change, right? To the point that you can probably never fully ever disengage it from the human condition again. And that's when change will start to happen. That's not a lot of years. That's not a lot of years. I won't see it, but it's not a lot of years. It's 3 generations.
Well, it's sort of starting to happen now anyway. I mean, that's my feeling, is that it's starting to happen. We're starting to allow and recognize and accept. And certainly, I mean, we as mothers have encouraged our kids. I sure know that. But yeah. I'm curious, going back, David, when you first got there, were you like, dang, this is interesting? So
no, I thought it was
weird.
I look, first of all, I'm kind of a consummate trainer. I mean, I was evaluated by the regimental commander and the Rangers as the premier trainer in the Ranger Regiment. And because I was blessed, this was not because of my own prowess and intelligence. It was because I had the blessing of being raised and mentored by some of the greatest officers in the military ever. I mean, ever. So my biggest mentor was Brigadier General Kenneth Luer, who was the officer in 1974 as a lieutenant colonel, was given the Creighton-Abrams Charter, which was to form or reform 1st Ranger Battalion and to train it and stand it up and evaluate it and make it ready within 6 months. And he was given full run of the entire Army to select his officers and non-commissioned officers and enlisted men to build the 1st Ranger Battalion. He is a man that completely understood performance-oriented training and was a huge disciple of it, as it was performance-oriented training is another one of these things that came out of the 70s for helping him figure out how to rebuild the Army. It was a brainchild of a guy by the name of Dr. Robert Mager. And it talked about the establishment of training programs and standards, task condition standard, etc., and how to measure human performance in relation to the task conditions and standards, to where they adopted no longer a percentage. So you either, in the military, you either did meet the standard or you did not meet the standard. There was no, flipping and flopping. It wasn't like, oh, you got a 70%. No. You had to get, meet the standard. And if you didn't get the standard, go. It was called a no-go. And every military school was built in that way in the 70s. And in the 70s also, this is when you started to see things like the organizational effectiveness training. It became a secondary specialty for our officers and non-commissioned officers. These kind of touchy-feely sessions that went on, that were kind of worthless because it never ended up, what introverts ever came up with never made it up on the board. And then no matter what made it up on the board, the final decisions were made by the ranking man in the room, who was usually the guy everybody was complaining about, right? So anyway, that didn't work. But that's where you had the Task Force Delta think tank. That's where you had, Lieutenant Colonel Channon, who was the 1st Earth Battalion, the author, creator of the 1st Earth Battalion. The Men Who Stare at Goats, that jackass book, and the guys that wrote it, I mean, I have to admit the movie was funny, but the movie was not true. And the book was just a ridiculous creation by, some skeptics that this guy wrote. And actually the guy whose name's on the book didn't write the book. Some other guy wrote the book. And that all fell apart in the movie because the guy that wrote the book didn't get anything out of the movie. It wasn't part of the production contract. And so he got all pissed off. And he sued George Clooney's production company.
You have to at that point.
It all fell apart. Oh, yeah. So it was gonzo journalism at its finest. And they made a mockery out of Lieutenant Colonel Channon, who was really sincere. And he was highly applauded for what he was doing in creation of the 1st Earth Battalion. And it was being briefed all over the Army. And there was an implementation program where by by 1991, they were supposed to have an entire regiment stood up that had all been trained in that way. And those 1st Earth Battalion manual and the slides and things were all over Special Forces, the Green Beret, and they were all over Special Ops, Black Beret Rangers. Now they wear tan berets. That was everywhere in the special operator community. People knew about it and were, marveling at the idea that these kinds of things were going to be developed and taught, and we're always looking for where's it going to be. Learning from Lure how to do this and then making that just my MO, he taught me how to be a commander and a trainer. And so I show up in this organization and they start my training after I have to look through the entire historical files of everything, and had everything to do from 1972 to present with any intel on foreign intel collection efforts utilizing this kind of capability or trying to block this kind of capability. So you had to start at the top drawer, front file, and when you got to the bottom drawer, back file, you were ready to start training. And when I got to the training, the first thing I asked is, is there a training outline? No. No training outline. Is there a program of instruction? No. Is there a manual? No. So no manual, no program of instruction, no training outline. So I guess what? It's just like whatever Gabrielle pulls out of her pocket that day. Yeah, pretty much. So, it was clear to me that third thing that that SRI was supposed to do didn't come through, which was, can you replicate and build a training program? Well, of course they couldn't. They're physicists. They're mathematicians and scientists and psychologists. They're not, they may have taught a physics class, at Stanford, but they're not educated. They're certainly not military trainers. And so, no, they never codified or solidified a training program. And that was disheartening. And the science was not there to explain that. And I always think that way. But, Gabrielle was an excellent teacher. And the only person that really could answer science questions was Ed Dames. But, he had his own sets of inherent issues about stuff that was going on there. But I went through the training program, and I was allegedly have gone through it really quickly, faster than anybody else that had gone through it. When I got there, they said 12 to 18 months to become an operational viewer. And I was operational in 4 months. So I think the most important thing for your listeners to understand is that I stepped into it as a heavy-duty skeptic on it. Just because I had read that stuff, it didn't mean that I bought off on the idea that I could do it. And that is part of our belief systems, right? It's like a number of studies have been done over the years where different polled populations have been asked two simple questions. First question, how many of you believe that there is something part of it beyond the physical? Something beyond the physical. You don't have to call it God or heaven or anything like that. How many believe that there is something beyond the physical? As it turns out, and these numbers change only slightly over decades, but 40 years ago, the first one done said 98% of the population polled, which was around 2,000 respondents, said, I believe there's something beyond the physical. 2% said, I do not believe there's anything beyond the physical. So the operative word here is believe, right? Because neither side can prove that there is or there isn't. So it's just a belief. So believing, therefore, can be defined as easy. It's easy to believe something. We all believe something, but what do we actually know and how do we know it? And so the next question asked, because my perspective on it is, I don't even address the 2%. I don't care about the 2%. I care about the 98%. And in the 98%, they asked the second question, which was, if you believe there's something beyond the physical, do you believe that you will ever interact with it, learn from it, contribute to it, touch it, hear it, whatever? Do you believe that it is something that you can have an experience with? Now, this is where it gets interesting, because the answer to that has again changed only slightly in 4 decades, even though the respondent pool has grown from 2,000 to upwards of like 10 million worldwide. It comes back as 24% of that respondent pool who believe in something beyond the physical say, I believe that I can probably interact with it, that I can, learn from it, and that I'm part of it, and those kinds of things. Yeah, I believe that. 24%. The 76% resign themselves to the fact that they believe in something beyond the physical, but they do not believe that they themselves will ever have an experience with it, or that they will, not in the physical world, is how they condition it, right? They just don't believe that there's any way for that to ever happen. And why? Because they've been told that it won't. And therefore, they themselves have filtered their external experiences and internal experiences to not accept the definition of something like that. So they just don't believe that they are worthy enough or smart enough or capable enough, or that it actually, might not exist, even though I believe it enough, kind of thing. And I thought that then both of the 98%, categories become of interest to me. And that's where the work needs to be done. So I was in the 74%. Let me explain to you why. I mean, the 76%. I was in the bishopric and in a stake presidency of the Mormon Church. So I was a high priest in the Mormon Church. I was a convert because I went to Brigham Young University on a wrestling scholarship and a student leadership scholarship and an Army ROTC scholarship. I converted while I was there and got married, and I found myself, especially while serving in the bishopric and while serving in the stake presidency, this is like 3 men, become the patriarchs of thousands of families or hundreds of families. And you stand up at the pulpit because there is no paid clergy in the Mormon Church. You stand up and you give testimony and teach lessons to the congregation. And I found myself saying things that I felt hypocritical for, because I did not hear the word of God. I did not receive revelation for my family or for, the church or any of those things. When we would sit down and, tell somebody before they got excommunicated that we had prayed about it, we went through the motions, but, I didn't feel, a heavenly presence that came to me and said, whisper in my ear and say, yeah, excommunicate that person. Right. I just, the more I did it, the more unease I felt in doing all of these things. So I stuck with it because it was one of these things you do well. And so therefore you think it's not your own purpose and you're supposed to be doing it. And plus my wife at the time was really into it. And, my kids were just following, wherever any parent takes their kids on Sunday. So I had this 76% skepticism going on in me. I believed that there's something beyond the physical, but I had no relation to it whatsoever. So when I was being trained, you're getting these things, they go through stage 1, and you're given stage 1. The theory that they gave you just absolutely sucked. They had no relation to quantum mind or quantum mechanical concepts. In physics, they had nothing. The science was terrible that they were doing it. So that right there, just had a shield drop down for me, because it was like, you can't explain any of this. I mean, you have not even a theoretical, foundation for what this is or how it works. You just like, it works. And so then you get to the point after you get through the theory and you get through stage 1. In stage 1, you're given 2 sets of 4 numbers. I'm like, what do those represent? Well, the 2 sets of 4 numbers are randomly assigned. Okay, but what do they represent? Well, they represent the concept of the target. Concept of the target where? in the mind of the person assigning those two sets of four numbers. Say that again. Like they represent the concept of the target in the mind of the individual, randomly assigning two sets of four numbers. That doesn't mean anything, right? As it turns out, it actually does, but they couldn't explain what it meant. So for me, it was again, just, this is, on to the next thing. Then they ask you to do an ideogram. Now, an ideogram is after you take the last number in the two sets of fours, you autonomically respond across the page, which is with a pen, a black pen, and that is what is called an ideogram. And that is there you go. First graphic. No, that's a sketch.
I'll find it.
The ideogram is where the numbers are on the back. So the ideogram represents the first. It's the first graphic or graphical representation of the target site. And it has to be decoded into an ABC component. The A component is describing the motion that you feel, the feeling of the ideogram. Do you feel it rising up, dropping down, circling around? What does it feel like? Now, I know that this all sounds like ridiculousness, and it did to me at that point as well. But actually what happens is when you get to a certain point where these conduits of consciousness become open, and you are in the process of detecting, decoding, and objectifying, you understand that you're going from 8-dimensional hyperspace, or following the term, the idea of the physicist in the 60s, Itzhak Bentov, talking about the holographic matrix field. You are talking about the place where your unconscious mind is connected into the holographic matrix field, into 8-dimensional hyperspace. You are, right? It is the place where the omnipresent, omnidirectional waveform expression of everything
See it, Diana?
exists. That's an ideogram, yes. Right. And you have to, when you respond autonomically, what happens in that ideogram happens for a reason. And so in just describing the motion or the energy of the ideogram, then you go into the B component, which says you have to determine, is it man-made or natural? Now, the biggest thing that people struggle with is how am I supposed to do that? And that all has to do with modalities of perception and agreements that you come to with your conscious mind that say, when it is this is, for me, it's a texture, because my two principal modalities of perception, I found out in the months to come, were visual and auditory. So those are my two modalities of perception. I do not have good gustatory modality nor olfactory, modalities, or others. Not even tactile, really. But I am visual and I hear. But all of the other modalities, I never really spent a lot of time trying to develop. But that's something you learn in class. And then when you get to the C component, you have to decide: is it land-water interface, water, mountain, structure, those things, and you have to determine, is it what of those things it is. And again, it's an agreement that you have to come with, or you just do what I did, because they had no training program. They didn't tell you what to be looking for. They were like, you gave me the numbers, and I sat there. And then Gabrielle goes, you're supposed to do an ideogram. Well, I don't know how to do an ideogram. What's supposed to happen? Is somebody supposed to move the pen across like a Ouija board? Something just moves my hand and I create this thing? And it's like, no, you have to start it. Like you just move, but unintentionally, and it'll, actually what happens is because of going through the mind, and just as you are going through from the unconscious to the conscious mind, is that the detecting of something has a physiological effect on the body. And it's theorized that the subcutaneous connective tissues in the body, that as you're moving that it causes, small reflexes in that line that then you learn to be able to decode those into those other things that I talked about there. When you finish that, then you're going into stage 2, which stage 2 is, You can sketch in stage 2, and you learn all these things about signal line. You are now using these modalities of perception to detect, decode, and objectify colors, textures, temperatures, taste, sounds, smells, dimensionals, energetics, etc. Drawing structures or whatever else you see, sometimes just textures, but you learn to probe and label them, meaning you can't just draw a circle with some hash marks in it. You have to be able to probe it and say it's hard, it feels metallic, it's this, those kinds of things. And so when you first start doing that all the way up just to stage 3, you find yourself second guessing yourself, and they will, when you're done with it all and you type up your summary, my perception of the target were these, they give you the feedback. And in training, the feedback in those days was not a video or anything like that. And there were typically no quantifiable attributes that pertain to the target. They would give you some Xerox copy of something that had been a Xerox copy like 15 years ago, right? So now it was just all black and had the title what it was, and you had to go look to the library and look it up for yourself. And I found it very easy to criticize my work and stand in disbelief of what I was doing. I found that very easy because of just the poor quality of what was happening there. But there comes a time that as you move into stage 4, to stage 5, and into stage 6, that as you're moving into this, now the volume of data that you are deriving from 2 sets of 4 numbers, and you are through stage 1 at your narrowest opening of the aperture, right, of this detect, decode, the lens through which you are seeing this target. And each stage widens that lens, that aperture, if you will. You're seeing more and more and more and more. And by the time you are working through stage, 4, 5, and 6 on this thing, there are so many attributes, so many pieces of data and sketches and, verbal descriptions of the thing that you're seeing, that when you get your feedback, you can no longer quibble with it. I mean, that's what happens. You can no longer quibble. There comes that day where you just go, oh my God, I have a superpower that I never knew I had. And that is that day where there is so much undeniable, irrefutable, empirical evidence that's being developed by you with no help, no front loading, 2 sets of 4 numbers. And you get that feedback and you realize that you were just describing the dome of the rock from inside the dome of the rock. And you sketch everything that's in there and textures and the architecture and the curves and the domes and all the other human life forms and blah, blah, blah. And it's hundreds of pieces of data. And out of those hundreds of pieces of data, 60, 70% of it is accurate. And, another 20% of it is less accurate, and then there's a percentage of it that's unusable. It's just pure imagination, which is going to happen. And when that happens, when you get to that place where you have this transformation, I remember it vividly. From that second on, I did not ever look at myself in the mirror the same way again. And I could not ever see how I could possibly give up what I had just learned, or how I could walk in my life and stand in my life and not understand how much different it had just become. It truly moved me and redefined me as a man, as an Army officer. But there's also there's a drawback to that, because they did not ever have a plan for teaching you how to handle that awareness, right? So they had a cute little term for it called a Messiah complex, meaning that, so now you realize you're eternal, kind of thing. And there was no system for grounding you. There was no coaching, counseling, guidance, rule book, because now, once that transformation happens and there's nobody there to say, okay, now let's think about these things. This is what you're going to feel. And they brought all the spouses in there. So when I got there, Fern Gavin asked me to bring Debbie in, and she's like, what's he going to do? And I said, he just wants to talk to you. Well, what he did was he sat her down, and that's when she got the speech that your husband is not going to be the same guy that you're bringing in here. He's not going to be the same guy you married. He's just going to be completely different. How is he going to be different? You'll see. He's going to be completely and totally different. He's going to be exposed to things here that are going to alter his personality, and it's going to alter how he sees the world and acts in him. I don't think Fern had permission to do that from DIA, and certainly not the CIA, but he just thought it was his way to kind of salvage marriages by preconditioning that and make sure that the spouse was supportive of it and understood it, which I think that all sounds fine in his head, but that certainly didn't inspire confidence in any spouse who sat there and heard something like that, right? And so then when it starts to happen, it's kind of like this, this is all your fault kind of thing. That starts to unfold between couples. It's mind bending, especially when you walked in there not thinking that was even anything, remotely possible for yourself, right? You just didn't think it. It was less impactful for people who went there because they had already made a stated or an espoused capability or awareness of these things in them. Like Mel Riley's first experience with like a dimensional shift was something at like the age of 13 in Racine, Wisconsin, walking through a field, right? Where he's walking through a field in the sun and in the morning sun. And as he gets through the other side, he starts hearing drums and smelling campfire smoke, and then turns around and sees Native Americans camped in the clearing, the meadow that he just walked. That was his first experience of something like that. So a guy that goes through those kinds of things in life and embraces it is not going to have a real big shift when, in their consciousness, when, they suddenly realize that they have a superpower. Right. So most of them all walked in there with that belief to begin with, but I did not.
But this sounds like the military. They don't really prepare spouses or anyone for anything that and what's going to happen after these experiences. That's pretty normal.
Yeah, it was. You're right. That and many other things they don't prepare people for, which is why veterans kill themselves at the rate now 23 a day.
Yes,
right, 23 a day, almost one an hour. They see things and expose them to things that human beings are really not meant to see. They're not meant to see them or smell them or and all those, the sight, the imagery and the smells, even the tastes, they should never have to see that as young men and women. They just shouldn't. And they do. And there is no program for unraveling that. I mean, they play at it like with kind of a lip service. I mean, they do have mental health professionals that are there, but it's not, it's nothing like you would expect. It certainly isn't come to therapy because they don't want officers and non-commissioned officers going to therapy. They don't want leaders going to therapy kind of thing. Anyway, that's another subject for another time.
But it speaks to what you went through because no one had prepared you for this either, or your spouse or your community. So I'm sure it was a huge transition for you.
Indeed. Indeed. But
a positive one. But
and it also, I started to see through things like, and I mean that not literally, figuratively. Mm-hmm. Like I began to see through people. Mm-hmm. And in seeing through people, it means that the mask is off and you're in the military or in the intel world. You start to see people for what they really are, right? Or at least as you're perceiving it. And that can cause a great deal of conflict. You're in a military structure. You can't work for a 2-star general and have in your mind and in your heart that this guy is just an absolute scoundrel, not nearly as smart as he wants everybody to think he is. And you have now caught him in at least 4 different lies. And you know that he's been responsible for killing 2 soldiers through bad choices he made out in the training arena, and then was unwilling to take responsibility for it. And the system covered it up. And you see things like that and you react to that. And then you have a tendency, the brakes on your mouth are taken off. And so that too is not a good thing to have in the military.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yay.
So you start.
We know how that goes.
Right.
And treating people differently. And that is not productive if you're going to wear a uniform and show up for work being, the G3 of the 82nd Airborne Division, or the deputy G3, or training officer for the 82nd, or an interim battalion commander. I just could barely stand it. But anyway, once that had happened, it shifted that. And I didn't really understand, where to put the brakes on and how to treat it and deal with it appropriately. But one thing I know that I did was sitting at my desk as a battalion XO, hadn't yet taken the battalion to command it for several months, waiting for the battalion commander to come in, the designated, chosen one. I made the decision to write Psychic Warrior, which I hate the title of that book.
We like it. Yeah. It's awesome.
I love it.
Think myself
we love that title.
And never would. And do not believe that I have I never profess any psychic abilities or anything like that. I did not choose that title. That was St. Martin's Press chose that title. And it was only my second book. My first book, Non-Lethal Weapons, War Without Death, which is essentially a textbook on non-lethal weapons and their employment in combat. And you learn that when you're working for a large imprint like St. Martin's, publisher like St. Martin's, that if you want the book published, to keep your mouth shut and do, they make the decisions. It's all their marketing and their research, and they choose the colors and blah, blah, blah. And they choose the link. The first manuscript was 740 pages long, and it was called Comes the Watcher.
Oh,
that's a better title.
And
You're the Watcher. Are you the Watcher?
Yeah,
are you the Watcher, or is your guide the Watcher? The guide, you're the Watcher.
No,
yes, it's your higher self. It's your higher
You're
self showing up as this
Right.
Obi-Wan.
It's my
Just if we could go
higher
back to
self
that for a
showing
second. Whenever I have one of those moments, David, they usually look like a Jedi too. So you're in good company. So the title was going to be Here Comes the Watcher. Was that it? Comes the Watcher.
No, just comes
I
the
we
Watcher.
love
love
that.
it. Yes.
Yeah, I did too.
Okay. That's
They
the next book.
didn't. So, Comes the Watcher, true story. It was the inside, but whatever it was, I can't remember, here's where I've been with this book after I wrote it and submitted it. And so my editor, Sean, took this with his assistant, and they went home, and in 3 weekends, they whittled 740 pages down to the 235 or 38 that it is. I'd never read it. After that, I
Wait,
never
who
read
did
it.
your audiobook?
Oh,
Was that
no,
you?
Hilarious.
Who read? Okay, I was going to say that.
I read the audiobook, but that was the abridged version. That's not even the same. So
Could part two? Could the pages that were
Yeah, we're doing
could the page the pages that ended up on the cutting room
Yeah.
floor, could those become Comes the Watcher?
way ahead of you. So it's going to be republished, and it's going to have parts added into it and parts, some of the parts taken away from it.
cool.
But it's just, the story will be told again, and there is even a continuation to it, which I Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to call it psychic warrior.
Really?
I don't think I can get away with calling it Comes the Watcher now.
Okay.
Yeah,
What
come
about
on.
psychic warrior?
Was, right?
Who
Maybe
cares?
Psychic warrior colon.
So,
Psychic warrior 2 colon Comes the Watcher. That's it.
there you go. Could be. That's a good one. That's an idea. So yeah, that's on its way, and so is Non-Lethal Weapons War Without Doubt.
Good.
There's a new version of that coming out. And the coordinate remote viewing manual, which I wrote, it says remote viewing, the complete user's guide to coordinate remote viewing. There you go. Yeah. That is basically the manual that I was asked to write in my last 3 months in the unit before I left to move on to the next assignment, which was the third circle of hell. And that was when I became,
What is that? It sounds terrifying.
Great skills.
It sounds terrifying.
This sounds like master classes.
Yeah. So for the last 3 months I was there, I wrote like this 280 page manual, which I'm sure, I was asked to write it by Dr. Jack Verona and by Fern Gavin, and I wrote it and gave it to them. And they, it got good reviews and they wanted it. And so I'm sure they handed that. And then there were people who were in that unit that had lived up their entire career there. I mean, I know exactly what they were thinking. They're like, there's no way. There's no way we're going to let that guy who was only here for 3 years write this manual. I've been here for 10, or 12, or I think there was one person that had been there like 15 years. That's 3/4 of a military career. And that same building, in that same place, doing that every day, day in and that day out. Some of them just went there and dropped anchor and never had any intention whatsoever to go back to the Army. I, on the other hand, was just there because I wasn't in Italy. So I did one special access program. This is now special access program 2, and I'm done. And I'm ready to go on my next one. I have to do one more, and then I'm off to Commander General Staff College. So my next one was Torn Image, that is where I learned to become a strategic deceiver. And a strategic deception is a lie that is sustainable for a minimum of 10 years. It is a strategic deception, not tactical deception, strategic. So I'll give you an example. For 30 years, we had, during the Cold War, one of the biggest fears was the Soviet use of anthrax. And so, and all Warsaw Pact allies had anthrax, allegedly. They had it in artillery rounds, they had it in rockets, they had it, just about any way you could think of to deploy it on the battlefield. And it would have been really deadly and horrible. And so the United States, while developing their own kinds of biological weapons, what they did was they had to build a deception that said, or let the Soviet Union believe, that we had an antidote for that. So yeah, go ahead and use it, but we have an antidote. We have an oral antidote, was the first one that came out. Now we have an injectable. The injectable later that came out much later was atropine, which could be used, but the oral that they had out first, and they had it out for at least 2 decades. And this came in blister packs that had lot numbers, expiration dates on them. There were instructions for use. Stocks were purchased, shipped forward and stored in containers. Medics and physicians were trained to go out, do the inventories, check the lot numbers, expiration dates. There was medical literature that had been published that, talked about contraindications, side effects, and this, that, and the other thing. Everything you would expect to see. There were writings about it that were put into various classified journals that they knew would eventually somehow show up, on some Soviet intel, into the KGB somewhere. Some of it may have been released on purpose as, because they put stuff in there that is disinformation, or they make it try to look as truthful as they can. And why would they do this? It's because the whole idea is in that spy versus spy world is you're trying to get the enemy to expend resources, personnel, time, money, research dollars that could be spent doing something else, developing another biological, agent. They have to figure out, could you really, is what they're talking about here real? Could they do that? Could they block our agent? And if they are, then we have to change the agent. We have to do this or do that to make it, defeat that antidote so that we still have a lethal option, right? We have to do that. And as it turns out, after 20 years, and I was only in this unit for a year my responsibility was to build a counter-narcotics strategic deception. And I'll tell you about that in a moment. But the anthrax antidote was aspirin. It was aspirin. It was coated aspirin, unmarked and packaged by a Whitting pharmaceutical company. And all of the stuff was developed by, medical personnel that were doing it for and in behalf of, knowing, what they were actually doing, that it was all just a lie. But it was done well enough to be believable for 20 years before somebody could actually find it out. And, now that's no longer something that they're using, but that's a strategic deception.
Is that one of the things that made you resign from the Army?
Well, it was one of the things that made me realize that I was starting to develop not just difference of opinions, but distinct differences of philosophy. Because I was starting to realize that, things weren't true anymore for me. The veneer had worn thin, and I could see through things now, like I said, right? And it wasn't like it used to be for me. It used to be everything was yes, sir, and go do do your worst, meaning do your best. And I never ask a question. You just do it, no matter what it is, you do it. And you make sure your subordinates are capable of doing it as well. Just increase lethality and precision and do those things. Train like that. Now you're looking at things and asking yourself a question like, why? Why are we doing that? Why are we back at this again, kind of a thing? And it was funny just to find, the human dynamic even in the community that you ladies are in. And because I stopped doing it. It's like had been asked a large number of times to speak at a number of big conventions, like, in those days they were big with MUFON, and there were others that I would go speak at. And in one particular one, I was speaking at it, and it was just a couple of weeks after 9/11. And when I did what a lot of people did that had been asked to talk about things, and I just kind of got up there and I went, look, I'm sorry. I know what you want to hear from me. And I said, I just don't have it in me to stand up here and talk about the crap you want me to talk about. So I said, what I'll do is, most all of you know my background. I said, I just want to answer questions, and that's what I'm going to do. So they already had, microphone stations set up, and then the line forums, and the big question was, what do you think about the planned, retaliation in Afghanistan? And I said, coming in here, I saw all the American flags, the plastic flags hanging from everybody's rear windows, they were rolling them up in the windows. And, I see it all. I got it. I understand. You're pissed off. You're hurt. You're angry. You're vindictive. I understand it. I go, but us sending, the youth of our nation over there under some idea that we are going to, change that nation. We're going to build a mini me over there. We're going to remove the black wave of, Islamic fundamentalism. We are going to educate the women, give them the vote, and we're going to a TV in every mud hut. all these stupid things that we are, going on with this. And I just stood before their 1,800 and something people. And I said, look, it is absolutely the wrong thing to do. I go, it is an insurgency, number one. And they call Afghanistan the breaker of empires for a reason. Every empire that has ever been there and tried to conquer them and that part of the world and transform them and make them better has lost everything there. Everything empire that has gone there to do that. And now you're going to see us there. And I go, look, listen to me really carefully on this. If we need to kill bad people, we have all of the kinds of technology and assets for us to find out where they are and drop a hellfire on them. And the collateral damage of that or some other method that we use is far less than what the collateral damage is going to be of putting 400,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines on the ground over there, plus allies, and attempt to hold the ground there and change it. It's not going to work. An insurgency by doctrine, and we have known this since the Vietnam War, requires a minimum of a 10-to-1 ratio. That means for every insurgent, 10 of ours. Constantly. Not just for a couple of battles or this or that, constantly, which means that we have to put more over there than we could ever imagine putting over there, plus enduring the expense of that. And that's not my biggest problem. My biggest problem with it was simply this, is that 5 years from now, some of you in this room are not even going to be alive. Others of you are going to be alive, but you're going to well have forgotten how you feel right now. Oh, you'll never forget the day, but the anger that you're feeling right now, that will have dissipated significantly. Trust me, it will. I've gone through these things before. It'll be kind of out, on the back burner of your brain, but there will still be young men and women dying in the dirt of that place 5 years from now. 10 years from now, when most of you, can't even remember why you were pissed off in the way that you were, we'll have long forgotten about this and moved on in so many different directions, or passed on, but there will still be young men and women dying in the dirt of that place. God, I never imagined it going for 20 years. I never in my life imagined that, but it's just a perfect example of what starts to happen. How that becomes a tar baby you cannot let go of if you embrace that. And it was the wrong thing to do. We could have taken care of business there. And the other thing about an insurgency, particularly in a place where, dying as a martyr is applauded, is this. Every time you kill one, 5 cousins join. And so it's a hydra that just keeps multiplying and multiplying. And if you're going to try to get a 10-to-1 ratio just stabilizes. In order to actually defeat it and wipe it out, you're going to have to kill far more than you ever. I mean, at that point, you're talking about almost the annihilation of a people. You're talking about total war. You're talking about like what we did in Germany in World War II. That is total war. And we are not prepared to do that again. In fact, we're still beating ourselves up for having done it then. But that is where you kill everything. Every chicken, dog, cat, horse, man, woman, child. You blow up where they live, where they sleep, where they eat. You kill everything. You destroy their industrial complex and everything around it, and you do it and don't care. And when you have wiped them out, near annihilation, almost to extinction, that's when they will capitulate. And that's what total war is. And we've evolved away from that now, which is why it makes it so much more pointless for us to get involved in those kinds of things, because we can't bring ourselves to do that again because it was so terrible but so final, right? So final. It was the only way to stop it. And the same thing in Japan. So I was completely disappointed in us, in us buying into just the fanfare of, destruction based on, a revenge fueled warfare and destruction. And I thought I have failed. And that's also when I stopped teaching remote viewing.
Oh, why is that?
I was because nobody was interested in spiritual pursuits and other things. I mean, let's review the bidding on that. What had happened is you had, starting in the 60s, you had this whole New Age metaphysical movement starting. So it evolved into various kinds of, of things. It was strong in the 70s and growing and ramping up. And, then you had, the psychedelic aspect that had carried over in part from the 60s. And that was still there with Terence McKenna and others. And in the 80s, it was still there and going strong, heading for the millennial shift, right? A big thing's going to happen there. At one time in the 90s, you could look around at these, these kind of universities of spirit, shall we call them? Places like the Omega Institute, Esalen, Kirpalo, crossings in Austin, Texas. There were 3,600 of those globally. And they always had filled classrooms. And they always had, Ram Dass, Thich Nhat Hanh, Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, Dave Morehouse. I was nowhere near those guys, but I was there. You had people going to these things and in large numbers, and as we crossed the millennial threshold and then found ourselves a year later in war, those institutions began to close down. I understand now, like at last count, there's well under 300 of them left. The crossings in Austin, Texas, which was a multi-million dollar operation that was built by a friend of mine who was the first marketing director of Dell. He and his wife, the Becks, they built this place and spared no expense. And he spent a great deal of time and thought in the doing of it. Huge spa, amazing, auditoriums and classrooms, and the places where the students slept were quite literally 5-star hotel material. Organic chef that won a competition to be there and cook. It was unbelievable, but it finally got sold, and I think the vast majority of it's closed up, and now they rent it out for corporate retreats and crap like that. So why? Because people were just like not interested, and we had 20 years of people not being interested. So I just pulled out of it because there wasn't an audience, and I could just tell that we were now squarely in a fourth turning, in a destructive phase of the global societal evolution. We had been already, but there was still hopefulness, right? That we were going to pull out of there and go into a rebuilding phase, but not when you put the world at war again like that. And now we're still in that destructive phase. But I sense in people the world over right now that people are now hungry for spiritual teachings again, or teachings that have to do with becoming awakened and aware and empowered and, standing in your own life and all those kinds of things. And so that's when I made the decision to kind of put myself back out there again and talk to people about these things that I had been part of and the lessons learned that come from living that kind of a life and being there and seeing the things that I see. So I don't talk a lot about those things from an esoteric, kind of position. I talk about it and I teach it from a science perspective, but I do it in lay terms for people who aren't scientists. I just want you, if you're going to learn it, to understand it's, where it comes from and why it's an ability that you have. And, but yeah, that's why. So, I hope all that helped you guys, and I hope your audience enjoys hearing those stories.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, part of this is that there's a transformative economy or a transformative society. I think, as you said, they're sort of hungering for this again. We've gone through a lot of different shifts, globally speaking, and we're still moving through other shifts. Perhaps we don't see war as the answer anymore. On a global level, and then internally as individuals, there's a desire to transform ourselves into something more, or something better, or something, wherever we feel like we might potentially be lacking. I don't like to use that term, or wherever we really want to grow. So bringing this back to remote viewing and that talent that or perhaps it's not a talent, a gift or a skill that can be transmitted to somebody else or awakened in someone else. That brings us back to you and your teaching of remote viewing and potentially some other things we were curious to ask you about.
Yeah.
So in remote,
go ahead and ask it and edit freely.
In remote viewing, is it what's the core thing that you hope people learn from it, gather from it, and why is it, an advantage or a skill that we might want to expand within ourselves, whether we're a nurse or a waitress or, a CEO, that sort of thing? How can it work for us as individuals?
Well, the most important thing that it brings to you in learning coordinator remote viewing, the whole reason for it is to go from believing to knowing, because, standing in your life as a believer, I know there are people who want to quibble with that because they see belief as something really powerful. It actually isn't. It's belief. Everybody believes something at the point that I made, whether they believe in promise and possibility or they believe in nothing but darkness, but they believe and they accept things on a basis of faith. And the true strength in humans claiming their power is learning a set of tools that allow them to transition from believing to knowing. And that only comes through doing the work in both the physical and the non-physical, and doing it with empirical evidence that allows you to look at it and go, my God, look what I did. And look at what the entire group learning this with me did, right? Because it's that transformation happens and you shift from belief to knowing. And knowing is a powerful stance. I know it. And I know it not just because I believe I know it. I know it because I did this work. I took my work and compared it to the feedback and saw all the quantifiable attributes. And I saw what I did and I saw what the rest of the class did. And it comes to that point where that shift happens. And I hear it over and over again from people that do that. I mean, it saved my life, they've said. It saved my life, or it taught me I have a superpower. It has inspired me to, drop what I'm doing and to do something different. It is amazing. It's just an amazing thing. And once you get through coordinator remote viewing, look, I understand coordinator remote viewing, and I understand it forward and backward and upside down and every way you can understand it. Personally, once you learn coordinator remote viewing, most people want to go straight on and learn one of the more hybrid forms of the phenomenon, like extended remote viewing, right? Or thought incubation, those kinds of things. Coordinator remote viewing is truly a dogma. I mean, it is protocol-driven dogma. And even though I know how to do it, I don't do it anymore. But I do thought incubation or extended remote viewing. And once I was deemed operational as a coordinator remote viewer, Fern Gavin says to me, okay, so what would you like to branch into next? And I go, well, what is there? I had no idea. He goes, extended remote viewing. Sounds like a thing. So, I wanted to do that. And when I did it, so coordinate remote viewing is done in an alpha brainwave state. And extended remote viewing is done in a theta brainwave state. So different tools that you learn to do that, and because you're not consciously aware and objectifying, which means sketching or writing the data that you are detecting and decoding, then you have to have a method by which when you come back up out of the session that you can quickly dump the data perceived down around things that are called focus questions. And focus questions are just nebulous, non-leading questions, right? So it might, what's the major energetic present at this target site? What's the, what's the dominant emotion present at this target site? Describe the main, the major feature in this target site, about this or about that. You can have up to 4 focus questions. I like to use give them 4 focus questions, but they learn a non-linear mind mapping technique, which allows them to, to recall that data rapidly and push it around those focus questions, and then learn how to chunk the data, chunk the data that you've captured there, and then turn that into a sentence or a paragraph, right? And then the next chunk of it, another sentence or paragraph, and blah, blah, blah. There it goes. And each focus question can be on a separate sheet of paper, or you can put them all up, vertically, or however you want to do it. Doesn't matter. It's just, if you work small, you usually recall small amounts of data. If you work large, give yourself lots of space. It's like standing up onto a whiteboard, right? And just dumping data around on the whiteboard. So they learn tools like that, which in coordinate remote viewing, that doesn't exist. Coordinate remote viewing is detect, decode, and objectify as it comes, right? So you're always consciously aware where you are. You're always consciously aware of where you are in the structure. You're also easily distracted by sounds outside, environmental conditions inside the room where you're doing it, or, so the extended remote viewing uses a different kind of a cool down tape as well. And the cool down, not tape, geez, listen to me date myself, the cool down MP3 now, but it has binaural beat in it and pink noise, and not white noise, but pink noise. And then it's a yogic relaxation breath meditation. It's 26 minutes for CRV, and it's like, I think it's like 28 minutes for ERV. Different. Yeah.
So how does this work?
Yeah, it's a good question. You're given the protocols in extended remote viewing about what to follow, and then you can utilize, any kind of process for it. I mean, some people are in zero gravity chairs when they're doing it. Some people, are laying on their bed at home. Some people might be, something else. And we used to do it in the classroom. Everybody brought like blow up mattresses or folding chairs and crazy stuff like that. And some people also, they would sit at a table and just put a blanket over their head. And it just, because they didn't want to, sometimes people are afraid to, they're going to fall asleep, despite the fact that they're told in the instruction that it doesn't matter if you fall asleep. How you govern all of those things is through your intention. And your intention is not an order to yourself; it's a request of yourself. If I fall asleep, it's okay, but I will remember what I perceive out there. And when you wake back up again, okay, fine. You fell asleep for a little bit; it's okay, right? Don't get upset. If you start worrying about something like that, it doesn't matter. You don't stop remote viewing when you drop into delta. So you go from gamma to beta to alpha, CRV and alpha. And even in CRV and alpha, you're going to porpoise back up into beta occasionally. You just can't help it, right? somebody sneezes or a door opens and something else, and now people go up, and you just have to learn to dive back down again. Just relax and descend back into the alpha brainwave state and continue to work. In extended remote viewing, in diving down into a theta brainwave state, you're no longer conscious of what's going on in the room. You're conscious of what you're perceiving in the target, but not necessarily of what's going on in the room. You can also porpoise back up to alpha from theta. And sometimes people, let go and drop down into delta. And they may be there for a very short period of time, or sometimes they're there long enough to start snoring. And if in big classes, when you're doing that, then the instructors have to walk around. You're told if you feel pressure on your shoulder, right, you're snoring. Nobody's going to go, stop snoring. They just put their pressure on your arm, and it just embedding that in their brain that's what they're going to feel if they're snoring. It's really amazing to see. You go around, you touch them on the shoulder and just push down on the shoulder. They instantly stop snoring because it registered, even though they're behind they have a face mask on, a blindfold. Most wear earplugs because they don't want to hear anything else. They'll keep them up. But you can do it any way you choose to do it, as long as you're just following the protocols. The protocols are slightly different than in coordinate remote viewing because you're far more vulnerable in an extended remote viewing, session. And by vulnerable, I mean you're in a theta wave state, and no matter what target I might send you to, we have to all understand and agree that there's as much darkness in the dimension, in the universe, as there is light. There's as much positive as there is negative. There's as much evil as there is, goodness. There's a perfect balance out there. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to bump into something that might frighten you. The point that you have to remember is that nothing there is more powerful than you. And you don't have to be afraid unless you surrender yourself or your fear to that. It also doesn't mean that something might try to disrupt it with you. Why? I have no idea why. I can only say that, I guess in that realm, there are some things that have had millennia to practice their craft. And if they choose to, disrupt you for some reason, and you allow it or invite it or let it or think that it's more powerful than you, then it may try, or it has. That stuff has happened. They've tried. So you learn how to shield yourself, and you learn, how to dump all of your, personal inclemencies and advanced visuals and things like that before you go into that session. And if you follow those protocols and you know that you have a sanctuary, and your intention in that sanctuary is that, nothing can follow you in there. Nothing is allowed in there. That is your sanctuary, all those things. Then you don't have those kinds of problems. But there's always someone who just wants to test the water, right? There's always somebody that, just wants to see just what that might feel like. And so they secretly, or I've had them turn around and go, yeah, you're right, I didn't do what you told me to do, and I invited it. And so then they come back scared about something. But it's not a physical injury or something like that. It's just, if you want to be frightened, go ahead and, allow something like that. If you want to feel helpless, then go ahead and, make that your intention, and it can happen. It's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of channeling and transmedium work and stuff like that. I understand some of it's real and some of it's just it's not real. But I also understand that people who dabble in it or do it, that there's a cumulative effect in the doing of that. And I've always just questioned the benefit of it. I mean, even in the unit, there were two of the girls that were there that started doing transmedium work. So transmedium work means basically you kind of have one foot in the physical realm and another foot in the non-physical realm. And you're listening to the question being asked by Fern Gavin, and then you're asking a guide or entity in the non-physical realm. And I know that Angela always said that she had names for the two guides that would show up for her. But being a bit of a logical thinker as I am, I was kind of like, okay, I don't get it. Like what self-respecting entity, in the non-physical realm has agreed to spy for the United States government? I mean, explain that one to me. I mean, what's the qualifying criteria to be an entity that's there going, yep, I'll do the dirty work of the Republic, I mean, I guess you'd come up with all kinds of scenarios to figure that out, but I just never thought that made sense to me. But yet it was actually embraced by some of the people, certainly not the remote viewers, but it was embraced by some of the other people in DT-S. I was always wondering, the value of the intelligence collected using that kind of a methodology, but just know it was employed. They did it. They did it that way for quite a while. And I can say that trance medium work, where you're actually going into a trance, and then that's where you're, listening and speaking. And then there is, of course, channeling. Now, I taught a remote viewing class at Jay-Z Knight's place in Yelm, Washington. In fact, it was probably probably about the 10th class that I ever taught. And I went up there with a bunch of detectives and a chief of police who I had trained the entire detectives bureau of a police department in New Jersey. And they accompanied me there to help me teach. There were 3,600 students in this class. But having dinner with Jay-Z Knight every night up at the mansion, no bones about it, that's what it was. We were, talking about things, and I was telling her about, these two girls in the unit that were calling themselves channelers. And she goes, well, explain to me what they were doing. And I explained, and she goes, that's not channeling. It's transmedium work. It's not channeling. Channeling is where you invite, you basically invite something into yourself, and you step aside and allow that to happen. And whether or not it's real or not for her, I don't know. It's not my job to quibble with it. My job is just to tell people to take fair warning. Why do you think that's a smart thing to do? I just don't think it is. And I think I'm like right on down to energy healers, because I really love this woman, the Dr. Jane Alexander. She was a DO, MD, a DO, not an MD, which DOs will tell you they're complete physicians. And she was an energy healer, and she used that exclusively. And she was really an amazing person, and really bright, warm, beautiful. And I said to her, how do you clear yourself from this? How do you're basically, based on how she explained to me that she was treating and what she was doing with it, it was like, that's like a transference. I mean, it's a transference, and it's like it's like transdermal, or only this is trans spirit, or trans emotional, trans, whatever you want to call it. I said, you're not convincing me that what you're doing is, fully removing this stuff from you after you spend a day or a week or a month of doing this stuff, this transference. She was convinced that she was, but, she got sick shortly thereafter and was just gone like in a year. And I can't get it out of my head that, we lost a really beautiful person, because working like that and doing those kinds of things without a full knowledge and understanding of, look, everything is energy, and energy is everything. And therefore everything can be expressed as waveform on some level. And if you're working in that area, you're working with waveform, which is causing a certain resonance within your own body and your cells. There's a physiological effect in the doing of that. Absolutely, there is. That we know that those frequencies can begin to entrain. They can do destructive, constructive interference with the frequency of your own body. And you're going from person to person, doing different diseases and different things like that. You have an entire soup of these things, close hand that you're working with, that cause entrainment of your own tissues, of your own cells. And if you can't shake that, and if you don't know how to shake it and don't understand that you may have to completely offset it in order to, have a constructive waveform interference that overpowers those and flattens them out and causes them to, the sympathetic resonance is what you're looking for, also called entrainment. If you're doing something like that to neutralize it, then okay, but she wasn't doing that. So that becomes an understanding of, just electromagnetics and of quantum mechanical concepts and interpretations that define why these things can catch up to you, get hold of you, and make you very sick, right? And I don't think enough people are aware of that. Particularly people that work in those fields are aware of that. They've all got a line that they will give you about, and they give you that line because whoever taught them gave them that line to give. And I take nothing away from what they do. I believe in what they do. I just believe that they don't understand what the contraindications and side effects are that go along with it. And maybe they do, and maybe some are less susceptible to it than others. I don't know, but I lost a really good friend.
We know people like that, so I'm sorry you had to experience that. And there is something to all of that. The energy intertwines and doesn't necessarily dissipate. It becomes part of you.
You asked me, what you would do, what would the waitress, the other things, what do you do with that? Well, I think, what I tell people is that once you are in this awakened and aware state, this knowledge, you use that to determine your purpose. You use that to, figure out, what's next for you in life. How are you going to live your life with this new knowledge? Continuing on is fine, but can you find a way to continue on more powerfully and more effectively? Are you truly on purpose? And how do you know, right? How do you know? And also, once purpose is defined for you, then now you have to understand what your calling is. Your calling is the mechanism whereby you honor your purpose. Okay? And that's another thing that comes from, root being embedded and foundationally supported by knowledge that allows you to go explore those things. And you learn new tools like thought incubation, which is an extraordinarily powerful, way to not ever waste a night in just sleep. Because if you go to sleep, every night that you go to sleep, you're going to go from gamma to beta to alpha to theta to delta. And if you, according to Harvard Dream researchers that have been in my class years and years ago, probably 2 decades now, they said, look, our findings are simply this: when the brain is in this sleep state, this dream state, it's rehearsing things. It's going over scenarios, right? That's why in some cases there's repeat, and sometimes there are different scenarios, but problems that are still being worked out. It's working through things. It's trying to figure out the most effective solutions. It's figuring out this over that. It's weighing, comparing, logging in, memorizing certain things. And you can allow that to happen, certainly, or you can purposefully incubate something when you go to sleep at night. So thought incubation involves being really careful in learning how to distill a particular thought incubation question.
Such as?
Go ahead and ask me a question. What if you had that tool and you were going to do that? What is a question you would ask yourself to incubate at night? If you got a question, tell me, and then I'll tell you if it's a good question or if it's a bad question, and I'll tell you why.
How are we going to expand the SOULFAM podcast?
Okay, it's not a good question. And it's not a good question because
it's not definitive enough.
Because it's not a good question because it's too nebulous. It's too broad. And in this process, it becomes a true equation of garbage in, garbage out. I understand the question and why you ask it, but it's about 10 questions. And I did a class on thought incubation down in Miami back in December to a bunch of powerhouse, millionaires. And the thought incubation class was that. And fun. Basically the questions that I asked them to come up with their questions, and then I sorted them all out. Every one of them did something like that. How do I expand my business? How do I do this? How do I do that? So that's 10 questions that you have rolled into one question. And so you have to take that one question now and break it down into all of its component pieces. And first of all, you have to understand, you have to really be clear with yourself and objectify. Don't leave it up here. Write it down, okay? You can type it, but write it down, or you can handwrite it. It doesn't matter. Write it down. What is the issue for you? Is it just people to be listeners, increase the listener base, and or whatever else? And then you have to start thinking to yourself, what are the things that actually get done to make that happen in real life? What's the sale? What's the sales funnel? What's the this? What's the that? What are all the different components of that? And you have to objectify those, because now you're looking at all the component elements that actually generate that question. Your question was asked because we have grown up now in the last 50 or 60 years being taught more and more to chunk things together. And look, we used to 40 years ago have a much better command of the language than we have now. Now we text and send emojis, right? Or we do other things to completely truncate our communications with other human beings. We tweet, for God's sakes, or something else like that. So it's a recent study actually asked this question of couples now. And they wanted to know how many different words, husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whatever, how many different words are you communicating with that person every day? Not same words, like how many times did you say and or something like that. No. How many different words are you communicating with? Guess what that study indicated. Just give me a guess. You'll be... Okay, it was a little bit more than that.
25.
No. It is, on average, it's less than 100 words, different words, a day that you're using to communicate with somebody you're supposed to be extraordinarily close with. And if you're going to chat with anybody, it would seem that that's the person you're going to chat with. From a language of some over 500,000 words in English. From over 500,000 words, we use less than 100 different words a day. And even in the total words being used, spoken, right, we're using somewhere around 250. You would think it would be thousands. Now, if you work in an office, the numbers might go up. Then again, you're asking, the question is, how many different words a day are you using to communicate with that person and with that person? Not the cumulative, right? But that person. And then when they actually, in the study, did a measurement of what was going on there, it was pretty much the same dialogue with every person, only slight variations. It's a little bit more information, a little bit less information, but basically the same dialogue. There are some differences in professionals, like, physicians or, nurses or somebody else, even an architect or a construction worker. Those people might have a different, slightly expanded vocabulary. defined by the job requirements, right? But it still distills down to pretty much the same thing. So that becomes the thing that you have to be very careful of in looking at. Build a command of the language back again for yourself. Understand that asking a generic question like that, that's really 10 questions, is just part of our conditioning now. Mm-hmm. So you have to unwind that and spend time looking at that and then bouncing it off each other as partners in this. And you look at 10 questions, and then you prioritize those 10 questions to achieve the objective of answering, how do I increase, right, something? Decide which questions first. And then what you do is at night, you don't have to have any special apparatus or anything else, because whether it is measured like on a brainwave trainer or not, you are going to go from gamma to beta to alpha to theta to delta. And you write that one question down in a journal or on a blank piece of paper, and you keep it nearby on the nightstand with, a night light or whatever, a pen to write with. Because last thing you want to do is, with the person you're sleeping next to, pop up and flip the light on and and grab your writing instrument and start scribbling on there and talking to yourself. So what will happen is you make it your intention, which again is a request. I would like to explore this question throughout the night, and anytime I have information, I would like to awaken and record it, or I would like to remember it in the morning. Now, if you've not ever done that before, like dream journaling and things, then you understand that this is a process of learning to do it, training your mind to be able to do it through intention. If you've not ever journaled a dream before, it's like when you get up, it's the oddest thing. You start trying to write it, and it was crystal clear, but as you're writing it, the other end of the paragraph just disappears, and it meets somewhere in the middle, and it's just dissipated and gone. And it's so annoying when you first start. Kind of the same thing happens when you're trying to capture your thought incubation concepts. But this is a powerful tool. I did a master's degree in school at the University of Michigan. And what I did was in Command and General Staff College. I was doing a Master in Military Art and Science, and I was doing a Master's in Business Administration. But I wanted to explore and do a comparison analysis between brainstorming and thought incubation. So I got permission of Command and General Staff College to let me use 2 different staff groups. And so I had 2 different staff groups, and we went through this same process. And we first did brainstorming. And then we took a second question and did thought incubation. And on average, between the 2 classes, thought incubation produced what was considered in the class to be at least 70% more usable data than brainstorming. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. Because brainstorming, again, requires extroverts and introverts to get along. And that rarely, if ever, happens. So introverted ideas rarely make it to the page. But in thought incubation, everybody harvests data, and then that can be compiled into just a list of what everybody said without names attached. And then that goes to whoever the requester is to start looking at that and figuring out how that works for them. And you can do that for yourself. Now, you may not answer that first question in one night. You might not answer it in a week. The more personal it gets, probably the more complex it will get. No, it's not a probably, it will. And it means sometimes the question has to be explored, for weeks to develop meaningful answers. But it will develop meaningful answers. You'll gain insight into the problem and how to solve it through working these different questions, just kind of self-lovingly and allowing it to come. You're going to be in one of the most highly connected creative states where people like Buck Charlson, he passed away now a long time ago, guy that founded Life Sciences Foundation in the Twin Cities. This guy, every patent he held as an engineer, he sat and told me one day in his home, he goes, every patent I hold, it came to me in an altered state of consciousness while I was taking a nap, or when I was just coming up out of dream state, or just going down into a dream. And so was the same thing from Eli Callaway, the guy who designed the Callaway golf clubs. Big Bertha is what he started with, right? He told me the exact same thing. He goes, I'm an engineer. He goes, but there's nothing I learned in being an engineer that taught me how to envision these creations. They came to me in what you're calling an altered state of consciousness, referring to me. They came to me in a dream or a nap. And there are countless examples throughout history of various inventors and creative minds, who did this, who recognized this and utilized this tool. And it just kind of got lost, in the rush of things. And it is something. It's a tool that we need to resurrect. We have use of it every night. Every night you're going to go through those brainwave states. Why go into non-purposeful sleep, right? Give your brain something to work on, and it will. Don't, and it'll just dig around until it figures out something to work on, because it's not going to just do nothing.
That's fabulous. It sounds, I'm going to do it tonight. I can't wait. Seriously. So, we would love it if we could resume this conversation again sometime. I think we're at a point where we both have other obligations this afternoon. So we had planned to talk to you about Chuckle Canyon, and we wanted to ask about some other things that are currently in the news. But so we're curious if you'd be open to coming back and if we can delve into that.
Of course. Yeah,
I think what we've gathered today are some really valuable tools for our listeners to delve further into. And I think they're going to love it.
Well, I hope so. And I hope it was interesting to them. I realize it might have been, outside their comfort zone in a lot of it, but I hope they just understood where it's coming from, and that they anyway, I just hope they liked it. So, sure, I'll come back anytime you want me to come back.
Definitely not outside of our comfort zone. We like being pushed outside of our comfort zones. That's the whole point.
Good.
So we're really grateful to you.
Yeah, it was my honor, my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the SOULFAM Podcast. Be sure to tune in to every episode where we dive into a different rabbit hole of the known and unknown to empower you in conscious living and exploration of the greater universe. We hope you leave each episode with a little stardust in your hair and inspiration in your heart. With love from your SOULFAM.